Welcome back, gentle listener, to Sleepytime Chronicles. Tonight, we continue the journey of Cécile, who now finds herself bound to a lonely prince, a wild black stallion, and a destiny that will test her heart. Shadows gather in the castle, whispers of betrayal stir, and the old prophecy begins to unfold. Yet within the storm lies a chance for love, for truth, and for redemption. As the story deepens, let the calm of night embrace you, and follow Cécile through fire, fate, and the legacy she is destined to leave behind. Close your eyes, rest your spirit, and let the dream carry you onward. Chapter 11, Change. "Cécile, you're back!" Sophie squealed a few weeks later, pulling me in the house, but I barely noticed her. I was looking excitedly around the room. My breath caught as I saw Elaine reclining in a chair before me, chatting casually with Christophe. "Elaine!" I screamed, doing a very good imitation of Sophie. "Cécile!" he said, giving me an uncharacteristic sort of smile, almost a smirk, where he normally would have grinned broadly. I did my best to repress a look of puzzlement as he asked, "How was the castle?" "It was very nice," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "I thought our honorable prince would have his servants working like animals," he said wryly. "He always did when we worked there." Sophie and Christophe added a few words of agreement, but I frowned slightly. Elaine would never say something like that. Had he changed that much in a year? But I went on. "It's about the same as it's always been. And where have you been?" "Oh, all over," he said nonchalantly. Another strange answer. "What's happened to Elaine?" I thought incredulously. He was outgoing and confident and relaxed. He even looked different. His brown eyes had a new glint to them. His skin was tanned. He was taller and more muscular than he had been the year before. He looked better than ever. I was a little perplexed, but I tried to act as though nothing was amiss. "All over?" I answered. "Doing what?" "Elaine's been sailing," Sophie piped in proudly. "Isn't it marvelous?" "Sailing," I repeated with surprise. "In King Philippe's navy?" "Isn't that what you said?" Sophie asked. King Philippe? He had gone to the next kingdom? Was that how bad things had gotten? "King Philippe's navy?" Elaine said. "Mon Dieu, Sophie, no. I'm on a merchant ship, under the ablest captain in the 7 seas. He stretched and put his hands behind his head. I sat down next to him. "A merchant ship? That sounds exciting." "It is," he said with a very handsome smile, "and it pays well." He eyed me with what appeared to be amusement. "You've certainly changed, Cécile." I barely suppressed a disbelieving scoff. I changed? Had he looked in a mirror lately? Really? How so? I played along. "For one thing, you're no fun anymore," he grinned. "Look at you, so serious." Sophie and Christophe laughed aloud, and I blushed. "Well, I have had plenty to do at the castle," I said vaguely, suddenly feeling very solemn and boring. Then I looked up with new resolution and said, "But I'm away now, so let's do something." "Yes, let's," Alain said with a smile, looking more like his old self. We stood up, leaving Sophie and Christophe. "Since when do you know how to sail?" I teased as we walked outside. "Cécile, I am a wonderful sailor," he said smoothly. "It's really a pity I wasted so much of my youth in the garden." "Wasted?" I echoed, slightly offended. "Surely you don't believe you wasted those years?" "Well, apart from the time I spent with you," he said with a suave smile. I giggled. It wasn't exactly the Elaine I remembered, but I did prefer him to the Elaine in the house. "We did have fun together, didn't we?" he said. I nodded and blushed. Elaine had gotten so handsome. "You're different too," I said suddenly. "Am I?" He smiled at no one in particular. "Yes," I told him. "Very different." I flushed again. That hadn't come out the way I wanted it to. I hoped he didn't think I was insulting him. "I missed you," I finished lamely, my cheeks flaming. He didn't say anything. Then he turned to me. "Cécile." "Yes?" I said with interest, looking up into his face. He paused. "Nothing." He smirked, looking away. "Oh," I replied with disappointment. What I had expected him to say, who knew? Before I knew it, my week with Elaine was almost up. I felt like we had never been better friends. Somehow, not even in the old days at the palace, when we were children and spent all our free time together. Now I looked for him every waking moment. We ate together, we walked together, we were constantly talking and joking. He was different from the old Elaine, it was true, but it was a good sort of different, I had decided. A more interesting Elaine. We have gone to the docks every day, ridden all over town, picnicked everywhere possible. I said the night before I was to leave, counting off on my fingers. What else is left to do in a small town like this? Elaine smiled, stretching out on the grass where we Saturday. "La forêt," he said. "The forest?" I repeated. "I almost got robbed in there, and it's going to be dark soon. I'll protect you." He smirked. I blushed. I simply couldn't say no to him. "All right," I said with slight hesitation. "I've got something to tell you," Alan said a while later. "I don't sail on a merchant ship." He pushed back a branch, and we went deeper into the wood. "You don't?" I said, stepping over a little creek that I could still hear babbling, even though I could scarcely see it in the fading evening light. "No." I could practically hear him smile. I suddenly wanted to go back to Sophie and Christoph's house. "What sort of ship do you sail on then?" I asked cautiously, after a few moments' pause. He didn't answer, merely heading further into the trees, into the darkness. We kept walking for a few minutes before I heard him say, "Let's sit down." I was very frightened now. There were eerie noises surrounding me. I could barely see a thing, and Elaine was making me nervous. "Elaine, perhaps we should go back," I began, trying to make my voice sound as though nothing was wrong. I heard the sound of a match being lit and saw Elaine's face in front of me. It was comforting. "Everything will be all right," he said quietly, smiling in a way that reminded me of the boy in the royal stables I had known over a year ago. He stepped closer to me and said, "Do you know what?" "What?" I answered, feeling like my cheeks were on fire. "Right now, you look exactly like the Cécile I remember." I looked down uncomfortably. Elaine took my hand. "Watch," he said, and in the light of the match, I saw an excited glint in his brown eyes. He put 2 fingers to his mouth and let out a low whistle. A moment passed. I looked up at Elaine. "Wait," he said softly. Sure enough, a few seconds later, someone whistled back. Elaine grinned at me. "This way," he said, pulling me in the direction the sound had come from. "Bonsoir," Elaine called. The 8 or so people around the fire looked up and replied with hearty words of welcome. "Who were these people?" I whispered to Elaine. "My friends and colleagues," he said back to me, smiling a perfect smile. "This is Cécile." They went around, introducing themselves to me with the chivalry of great lords. I still didn't know who they were, or why they were camped out in the forest, but they seemed like decent people. "Gerard," one man called. "How went things with your sister?" "Yes. How is it in town?" Another put in. "And where did you pick up this lovely girl?" I blushed. Alain took a swig from a pewter mug that had just been thrust at him and said, "She is an old friend." He beamed at me, then turned to one of the men. "Un peu de musique," s'il vous plaît," he cried, and one of the men grinned and brought out a fife, and the rest began to sing along with him. "Care to dance?" Elaine said in a charming voice, offering me his hand. I grinned and took it. "So, what do you think of my men?" Ellen said many dances later, walking slowly away from the campsite with me. "Your men?" I said. "Are you their leader?" "Of course," he said, looking somewhat surprised that I had to ask. "Well, what is it that you lead them to do?" I asked. "We're bandits," he replied simply. "Bandits?" "Yes, of course. What did you think?" he said quizzically. I was stunned. "Alain, a thief? My Cécile, you are slow," he said, grinning at my expression of utter astonishment. "I thought you were a sailor." "I managed to get out." "I was," he replied. "I sailed on a merchant ship for a few months, but I preferred this. Always an adventure." I stared at him, and he stared back at me. I didn't know what to think. Part of me was disgusted at the change from the old Elaine, my Elaine, and yet another part of me was impressed by his newfound courage and teasing manner. I felt my face heat up. He was also terribly handsome. He took my hands, and we kept staring at each other, perhaps for a minute, and perhaps for 10. We were very close. He leaned in and planted a single kiss on my lips. We broke apart and looked at each other again. I searched his face, not really knowing what I was looking for, but his eyes were unreadable. He began kissing me again, more passionately, and I let him before I suddenly realized that it wasn't what I wanted. He pulled at the strings holding my dress on, and I pushed him away with disgust. "Stop it, Elaine. You're drunk," I said, wishing rather than knowing it to be so. "I'm not," he said. "I'm just different from who you thought I was." "I know you are, and I liked the old Elaine better," I replied, almost hurt. "Don't you understand that?" His brown eyes turned hard, and he pulled further away from me. "Why don't I understand?" he repeated. "I'll tell you why I don't understand. Because the old Elaine was completely in love with you. I loved you, Cécile, but it didn't mean anything to you. You were far too spirited, I told myself, and I was boring. I convinced myself that I was the problem, that I needed to be changed because you were too good for me." Tears welled up in my eyes, but he wasn't finished, so I did change. I went off to sea and I came back here, and now I'm a completely different person. I wanted to be a better man, someone you would love. I came back, and I thought everything I'd done for you had worked, but I guess it wasn't good enough. I'm not good enough. Not for you, Cécile. No one's ever going to be good enough for you. He stood, gazing at me with a look of revulsion. Then he spat bitterly at my feet and left. I was sobbing quietly now, because he was absolutely right. Chapter 12, Misery. Somehow, the dull sound of Diavolo's hooves on the forest path captured my horrible mood exactly. And was it my imagination, or were the crickets whispering foul names in my ear? I hadn't stopped to say goodbye to Sophie and Christophe, merely grabbing my belongings and leaving the house. I had been riding through the night, and the sun was beginning to show. I drew my hood over my eyes so it covered the few rays peeking through the trees. They were giving me a headache. I couldn't believe I had thought the things I had thought about Elaine. I wasn't certain, but I may have believed myself in love with him. In love with that monster. Although I did know exactly what I had seen in him. He was so handsome, so charming, so fearless, so different. Different. Yes, he was unquestionably different. I was shocked. He had had the courage to say all the things he had said to me. How dare he, half of me would think, but the other half would reply tauntingly. But he's absolutely right, and he was right. I had always thought I was better than just a servant, better than the palace, and the castle, and Margot, and Sophie, and Elaine. I had even thought I was too good to have just a normal horse. I had had to have Diavolo. I looked down at him. His coat wasn't shining as brightly as it usually did. I had been neglecting him with all the excitement of seeing Elaine. I didn't deserve the beautiful stallion. Did I deserve anything I had? What imagined qualities did I possess? What prides justified my thoughts and actions? How could I think myself superior to another human being? What right had I to judge people the way I did? Why did I always feel myself above my company? Did I think myself more intelligent, more courageous, more important than they were? Why had I entertained the fantasy that I was a more complex person, a more refined version of my fellow servants? What led me to think that? How could I have been so blind? What had Sophie ever done to me, apart from show me kindness at the palace and in her home years later? And why, in the first place, had I ever dreamt of marrying better than my best friend? Didn't he know and love me best of anyone? What spiteful god of conceit and delusion had given me the idea to reject him? Because who else would have me, if not Elaine? What other hope had I in the world that I would ever find someone as kind and true and loving as he? His last words to me rang in my head. No one will ever be good enough for you, Cécile. No one will ever be good enough for you. The impact of his words, their cold, undisputable truth, had stung me. I had only begun to like Elaine as more than a friend when he seemed, well, more interesting. Elaine the servant had been far too dull and ignorant. Now that he was more worldly and attractive, I had finally allowed him to know me in a different way. And now he was gone forever. I had absolutely no expectation of ever seeing him again, and I wasn't sure if I minded this or not. Of course, I was angry with him. I was furious, but I somehow felt that if I saw him again, I would start sobbing rather than screaming at him. The thought of Elaine was as painful as it was infuriating. Who did I have left in the world? Maman and Papa. They were the only ones. But how would they be able to stand me? How had anyone been able to stand me? I couldn't even stand myself. The next few days, I wandered listlessly around the house, absently performing chores, pretending to read while I actually thought about other things. Or, more often, nothing at all. I kept vowing I would stop thinking of Elaine, only to hear his words in my head a moment later. When I wasn't at home, I was riding through the forest, or simply sitting on the ground in the middle of the woods, counting down the days until I could resume my position at the castle. I had never been so anxious to leave home. I wanted to get away from all of my problems. If I had revealed the reason behind my impatience to leave, Papa would have told me that I couldn't simply run away from what was troubling me. He would have said, in his most philosophical voice, that I had to stand and face it. But I didn't care. The thought of my simple life as a maid was the only thing keeping me going. At the castle, the most trying moment of my day would be when I had to carry a heavy bucket of soapy water up 3 flights of stairs. I wanted to worry only about a stubborn stain on a shirt and fingerprints on a window pane. 3 days seemed like a terribly long time. He was completely right, I murmured to Diavolo after one of our rides. I had been brushing him for nearly 20 minutes, and nothing had come of it. It looked as though he had been rolling in the dirt, but I knew that wasn't right. Diavolo thought he was a prince. He never went anywhere he didn't think was perfectly clean. He knew his coat was beautiful, and he didn't want to risk dirtying it. He was no better than a peacock, but I loved him for it. I exhaled deeply. "What do you think of me, Diavolo?" I asked the horse quietly. "I'm a terrible snob, aren't I?" I looked into his dark eyes, but they showed nothing. What had I expected? He was a horse. just a horse." He poked at my pocket with his nose. "No, I haven't any carrots for you," I sighed. I ran my fingers through his mane, and he shook his head a little, as though he wanted me to stop. "Fine, then. I suppose that's all I'm good for, isn't it? You only like me because I bring you treats, not because I ride you and talk to you and brush you every day." I threw the brush down and left Diavolo standing where he was, next to a pine tree. I hoped the sap would fall on him and dirty his precious ebony coat even more. "How stupid," I scolded myself a moment later, and I turned around. How stupid to have my feelings hurt by a horse. "She hasn't eaten a thing since she came home," Maman said in hushed tones to Papa. One night, as I lay in bed, I hadn't slept since I had been at Sophie's. I had to admit that I had been wondering when they'd have this conversation. Nothing escaped Maman's watchful eye. "A little starvation is always good for a girl," Papa replied. I couldn't tell from his voice whether or not he was joking. "George," Maman said with a tone of reproach, "I'm worried about her. I know she's upset about something, but I can't tell what. Something must have gone wrong with Sophie and Elaine." I smiled to myself. Yes, something had gone wrong with Sophie and Elaine. Not with Sophie, just Elaine. But I probably wouldn't be able to see Sophie ever again either. "My money's on Sophie," Papa grumbled. "She's always been a stupid girl." "No, she's not," I wanted to protest. Sophie was the kind member of the Gerard family, and she wasn't even a Gerard anymore. "Oh dear," Maman sighed. "I do hope it's nothing serious." "Oh no, it wasn't serious in the slightest," I thought, rolling my eyes. "They're young," Papa said. "I'm sure it's perfectly ridiculous." "I don't know," Maman replied. The crackling fire and the furious clicking of Maman's knitting needles was all I heard for a few moments. "Well, whatever's the matter, she'd best get over it," Papa said after a moment. "He'll be coming soon." Now, rather curious, I swung my feet quietly to the freezing ground and crept to the door. "He'll be coming soon?" Who was he? I strained to hear what Maman said next. "Oh, but do you still think it's a good idea, George?" she asked with urgency, "particularly if she is so unhappy?" "I don't know what I think anymore," Papa replied wearily. "The man has made up his mind. We cannot unmake it for him. We simply cannot say no, Virginie." I sat up. They could not say no? Who was this man? And what did he want? And what did I have to do with it? Chapter 13. The Choice. The mysterious man occupied my thoughts all that night, and the next morning, I had nothing much else to think about anyway. It couldn't possibly be Elaine. Papa and Maman would not refer to him, but as a man. They still thought of him as only a boy, just as I had. And besides, how would he have sent word to them? Maybe it was the prince. He certainly was someone to whom Maman and Papa couldn't refuse anything. But what would he want with me? I was going back to the castle soon enough anyway, but perhaps it was terribly urgent. Had something happened? Perhaps he meant to dismiss me like he had dismissed my parents. They would have spoken, thinking of him more bitterly though. I knew well enough that Papa did not think very highly of the prince. But what other men did I know? It was only the day after I'd overheard Maman and Papa's a conversation that I found out who the man was. I had gone out for another ride through the forest and was just coming back when I noticed a regal-looking chestnut mare outside of our back cottage. Truth be told, Diavolo noticed her first. "Come," and away from her, I scolded him, pulling on his halter, though my headstrong stallion simply would have none of it. Finally, I was able to drag him away and tied him to a tree. Sorry, I told the mare, presenting her with a carrot. Diavolo whinnied loudly behind me, wanting some of the spoils, but I ignored him. The gleaming mare gladly accepted my offer and crunched the carrot loudly as I stroked her forelock. You're a sweet thing, aren't you? Not afraid of me at all, I cooed. Cécile, Maman called from behind me. I looked over my shoulder to see her standing at the door, beckoning me toward her. Come in here, Cécile, she said with a hurried tone. There's someone who would like to meet you. The owner of the majestic mare I had just fed. No doubt. I stared at my mother, bewildered. Who would want to see me? Just get inside, Cécile, she whispered threateningly. Maman, I hissed back. My dress is all dirty. I've been out in the forest for the past hour. I probably smell like a horse. She hurried out to pull me by the hand. Oh, don't worry, dear, she said more gently, tucking a lock of my hair behind my ear. I heard the swish of a cloak, and a dark-haired man stood up as we entered the room. He had an aura of majesty about him, but he was most certainly not the prince. This is Comte Levesque, Maman said. Comte Levesque, this is Cécile. The man smiled at me and nervously brushed a strand of graying hair back. I looked at Papa, who gestured at the Count as if to say, where are your manners? Bonjour, Monseigneur, it said, still slightly confused. How do you do? Very well, thank you, Cécile, he replied in a softer voice than I had expected. May I speak with you? Bien sûr, I replied with surprise. Of course you may. Please, sit down. Maman and Papa left slowly, looking unhappy. I wiped self-consciously at a mud stain on my skirt, hoping the Count wouldn't notice it. May I offer you something to eat, monsieur? I asked. Or perhaps some water. I'm sure you have come a long way. Oh, no, thank you, Cécile, he said politely, but with obvious agitation. I sat in silence for a moment. I noticed that he was not clad in the sumptuous fashions of the nobles. Instead, wearing a somber uniform of plain black, he played fretfully with his hat, its feather being the brightest point of his whole appearance, and his eyes darted about in the room. Finally, he said, I noticed you talking to my horse. I blushed. I'm so sorry. I know I shouldn't have, I said. No, it's perfectly all right, he replied with a bemused smile. Do you like horses? I love them, I responded. He paused. I have many horses, but no one to ride them, he said, with a slight grin. At my home, the Château des Lions. Are you acquainted with it? It is not too great a distance from here. I beg your pardon, Monseigneur. I am not. I spent only a few years of my childhood in this cottage. He nodded, then said, with a hint of embarrassment, Please, you needn't call me Monseigneur. How rude not to acknowledge his social superiority. I thought with a slight frown. I'm terribly sorry. I didn't mean to cause offense, he muttered, probably noticing my face. No, not at all, I replied quickly. How would you wish me to address you? Call me? Well, never mind, he mumbled, looking down. He looked distractedly around the room again before saying, "I know you may. I'll be too old for stories now. But may I tell you one now? Of course," I said amicably, trying to hide my utter confusion. "Il était une fois," he began. "Once upon a time, an idle young noble met a woman named Mariette. She was strong and intelligent and beautiful, and he fell in love with her. He gazed at me with a terrible sadness in his blue eyes, and they were married, and it was the happiest day of his life, and soon they were to have a baby. Everything was going perfectly, and then one day they went out, riding in the woods. She was an expert rider, and they were having a wonderful time when he stopped, blinked back tears, and he took a deep breath. I tried to give him a reassuring expression, but he wouldn't look at me. The Countess' horse was spooked by a pyramid snake, and she was bucked off. They ran into a cottage, and she had the child right then." He paused again. "But she just wasn't strong enough, I suppose. She died in childbirth?" I asked softly. He nodded again, heaving a sigh. "And foolishly, the Count refused to take the baby," he said with crazed misery. To him, she was just a reminder of Mariette. So he made the owners of the cottage keep her. They raised her as their own. "I'm so sorry," I said immediately, moving to touch his hand, sympathetically. Then, suddenly, something clicked. I gasped and pulled my hand back. "Do you mean?" I breathed. He looked at me, his eyes shining. I stared at him. That can't be," I spluttered. "Zest, impossible. It couldn't be true. This man, my father? No, I must have had it all wrong. Cécile, you are so much like your mother, if you only knew," he said with a melancholy smile. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it away with a look of horror. I shook my head vigorously. "You are my father?" His look was an unspoken answer in the affirmative. "You can't imagine how proud I am," he said, "that my daughter has become such a beautiful young lady." I seemed to have lost the ability to speak. He continued, "I know this is a shock for you." "A shock?" That was an understatement. "Please, Cécile, will you come live with me?" I blinked several times. This was not a dream. His question snapped out of my state of awe. "Live with you?" I repeated incredulously. "Monsi, oh, I mean, well, I don't," I stuttered, realizing that I was being horribly rude but unable to change my tone. "I understand that this is rather alarming for you," he said, giving me a hard, meaningful stare. "And you barely even know me. But I hope you will consider it, because I finally realized that I've been missing my daughter all these years." He smiled sadly at me, patting my hand. I knew from his melancholy gaze that he was picturing his beloved wife, my mother. "Oh, I don't know," I said. He closed his eyes and nodded several times, but I couldn't break his heart that way. "Won't you stay for dinner?" I asked hastily. He smiled. "Why, thank you, Cécile. I'd like that very much. Maman, whatever shall I do?" I asked after he had left. "Cécile, I shan't say a word. This is a decision you must make on your own. But, Maman, I whined, I don't know him at all. How can I go live with him? Then, you've made your choice, she said pointedly, knitting needles. A clicking. Well, no, I said slowly. I couldn't do that to him. He's lost his wife, and he seems so kind. I let out a loud breath. Oh, why is life so difficult? Suddenly, I had an idea. Why can't you come with me? I'm sure he would understand. Oh, child, it isn't proper, Maman replied. My, and shoulders slumped. Cécile, Maman said gently, taking my hand and squeezing it lightly. This, I won't be an easy decision to make, but I trust that you will make the right one. Papa looked at me over his paper. His manor is not so far from here. Anyway, perhaps an hour's ride, much less on that racehorse of yours. You can visit any time you like. I traipsed over to my small bedroom and lay down on my bed. The Count, my father, that is, would return in the morning. I sighed loudly to no one. Could I possibly go to live with him? I had to admit I was curious. My life was completely different. My parents were not who I thought they were. My mother, what had she looked like? Did I really resemble her so very much? What sort of a woman had she been? What mysteries lay in my past, waiting to be uncovered? But could I leave the comfort and safety of the cottage and Maman and Papa? I would never again be able to sit around our little hearth in the evening with Maman knitting and Papa smoking his pipe. Instead, I would, well, what would I do? It was a wonder that after all my years of serving a prince, I had no idea what the wealthy did in the time between eating dinner and retiring for the night. Whatever it was, though, it was probably not nearly as cozy as reading an old a book by the glow of our fire. Of course, if my father were a count, it wouldn't have to be an old book. I'd have a grand library full of volumes upon volumes that I'd never read, more books than I could probably read in a lifetime, and I would never have to work again if I were the daughter of an aristocrat. I could sit about all day long in fancy clothes, eating delicacies, and sticking my nose up. Elaine's words suddenly came back to me, and I felt almost sick, although I wasn't sure I'd enjoy that life. Surely I'd still be able to take a ride through the forest with Diavolo. Would someone scold me for sitting on the dirt in my expensive gowns? It also meant that I would never see anyone from the castle again, Elizabeth, Hélène, or any of the other servants. But how could I deny the Count his daughter? I could see his pain. He missed my mother more than he could express. I was his only living reminder of her, and he seemed like a kind, generous man. Perhaps I could learn to love him as much as I loved Papa. How awkward it would be, though, living with the Count. I didn't know how to be a noble, and I certainly didn't know him very well. It was going to be a long night. The next day, when the Count rode up on his chestnut mare, I was at the door to greet him. It had been a sleepless night, but I had finally made my choice. "Whoa, Aurore," he said, and the horse trotted to a stop. "Bonjour, Cécile." He smiled at me. "Bonjour," I said. "Just say it," I told myself. "Then there will be no going back." I took a deep breath and announced, "I've come to a decision." My voice sounded strange, distant, not like my own. But I could not take back what I had said. Now I had to tell him. He did not say anything, but looked at me with expectation. I would like very much to come live with you. I paused, then added, Father, Chapter 14, The Count's Daughter, again. I closed my eyes, breathing in the hot, perfumed air that engulfed me. There were rose petals strewn about in my steaming bathwater. I had never enjoyed such luxury. My own maid waited upon me. She had just finished helping me wash my hair and scrub my skin until it shone as it never had before. It was terribly awkward, though, being served like this. I was too ashamed to ask her for anything, because I knew that with every of course, my lady, my maid Lucy was in reality thinking how lazy I was, how I could easily do all of this myself. She was right, of course, but my father explained to me that this was not the point. The daughter of a count would have a maid. There was no question. Here, there, I was an element of austerity to my new life. Father wanted me to be a lady, a daughter he could be proud of. Now that I was supposed to be an aristocrat, certain things were expected of me. I must not go anywhere unescorted. My early morning rides were out of the question, and if I were to take one, heaven forbid my doing so riding astride, I must take care to look the part of a wealthy count's daughter, even when no one was around. I must not speak out of turn. The most difficult of my new obligations was adopting the mindset that I was inherently superior to everyone without a title. It pained me to hold my tongue when his friends spoke of peasants as annoyances and parasites. I was a peasant. Who was I to say that I was better than they were? Father, he kept apologizing, saying that he had no idea how to raise a daughter, and that he knew I must be uncomfortable. He was so eager to please me, overwhelming me with gifts when all I wanted was simplicity. But I hadn't come to live with him because I wanted expensive gowns and jewelry. I had come because we were family. Father knew how much I missed Maman and Papa and my friends from the castle. He had even offered to buy Diavolo and bring him here to make me feel more at home, but I could not accept his offer. It would have made me feel worse, probably, but it was obvious that he was trying so hard to make me love and trust him. Even though he was so generous and only wanted the best for me in society, my father still seemed somewhat aloof. Was I upsetting his routine? I tried to tell myself that he wanted me there, or else he would never have asked me to live with him. But I could not shake the feeling that I was a constant interruption. I felt sometimes like he was buying me gifts so that I would stop bothering him. As a parent who buys a toy to busy a needy child, I disturbed his business meetings and walked into his study whenever he wanted to be alone, which seemed to me to be fairly often. Father's work habits were mysterious, almost to the point of being stealthy. He had guests at odd times of night, was constantly scribbling at his desk. Messengers were always coming and going from our house. I had had no idea how difficult it was to manage an estate. He let out a sigh. This still didn't feel right, and I couldn't think of any way to make it feel so. It wasn't as though life with Father was unbearable. He loved to read and take walks and ride as I did, and he loved me. But it was uncomfortable, and I was terribly self-conscious. I had begun a new life filled with maids and hot baths, needlework and refinement. And Father, I so wanted him to be proud of me, but it was hard to act the way I was supposed to. And where was my dear Papa? And Maman? I sat in my bath, scooping up the water and letting it trickle out through my fingers, a little at a time. Grain. Production is up, Your Highness, and in high demand overseas, says a graying official, modestly dressed. Our markets are booming, and more gold is coming in than has in the past 10 years together. Excellent, Prince Étienne replies slowly. He sits back on the sofa and sighs. Thank you very much, Robert, he says quietly. It is my pleasure. I must say, sire, your new plan has brought our small kingdom much success. You should be very proud. He pauses, then adds, smiling, or pleased, at the least. The prince does not return the smile. He closes his eyes and gives an inch or 6 expression that almost resembles contentment, but not quite. It is more like relief. He is not happy. Something nags at him. I am pleased that my people are more prosperous, he says after a moment. What troubles you, sire? Robert asks gently. A knock at the door spares the prince from answering. Opening his eyes, he calls, Come in. An older maid enters, carrying a tea tray. Jocelyn, should not you be performing your usual duties? The prince asks. We're short a maid just now, sire, Jocelyn replies, setting out a teacup for the prince and his advisor. Madame Tessier is still looking for a new one. Has someone left us? Why, yes, Your Highness, Jocelyn says, as she pours tea for each man. A letter came a few days ago from Cécile Pierpont. The color drains from the prince's face. Does no one care to tell me what goes on in my own home? He thunders. I beg your pardon, Highness, Jocelyn says quickly. Madame, Tessier did not think it necessary to trouble you over a housemaid's resignation. The prince exhales softly. Go, he mutters to Jocelyn. She curtsies and leaves, and is followed by Robert, alone. In the dark room, he sits in silence for a moment, seething. Then he give a shout. Damn. I awoke with a start. I was still in the bath, though my skin had long since turned wrinkled. The water was still warm, though. Lucy was probably behind that. I picked up a rose petal and played with it between my first 2 fingers. I had never dreamt of the prince before, and I couldn't recall ever having had so vivid a dream. It had been as though I was next to him, in his study where I had so often taken him tea. I had been unsure of how to tell everyone at the castle, especially the prince, that I would not be coming back to work there. I was certain, though, that I should not say why. Finally, I wrote a line or 2 saying that I was sorry, but I would. I have to give up my post. I addressed it specifically to Madame Tessier and included nothing about the Count and my newly discovered nobility. I had worried that perhaps the news would get to the prince anyway. But Father had kept my arrival fairly confidential. I was kept largely out of the public eye, which wasn't difficult, given our houses, the remoteness. And if it came to it, we had even talked of covering up and my long absence with a story about finishing school, to be used only if absolutely necessary. I shivered suddenly. I was freezing. Cécile, I have a surprise for you, Father smiled. A surprise? I said, putting down the book I was reading. I would have groaned had I not been so afraid of hurting his feelings. I knew that it was going to be something proper and boring. He merely smiled, leading me into the next room. There I saw an object, nearly as tall as I, covered in lovely purple fabric. Father pulled off the satiny cloth to reveal a perfect golden harp. My breath caught, in spite of all I had thought. Oh, it is beautiful, I breathed. The light of heaven seemed to shine upon the unwanted gift. I extended a hand gently. Would I break its delicate strings? Do you like it? He asked eagerly. I love it, I responded untruthfully. It was beautiful, but I did not want to be forced to learn to play it. I knew it was only another effort to further refine me. But you didn't have to do this nonsense, darling, he replied, patting my cheek. I've missed out on 19 years of buying you gifts. We laughed together. I'm afraid I don't know how to play, I told him. Fear not, my dear, Father said with alacrity. I have already hired you a teacher. Oh, Father, how wonderful, I lied. Although I probably won't be very good. I think I lack the dedication and the focus such an instrument must take. I'm sure you will be an excellent harpist. Your tutor tells me that you are a bright student, and Madame Remy is always speaking of your termination. He laughed lightly at his embellishment of the truth. My determination, I repeated with a grin. Oh, Father, Madame, Remy is so kind to put up with me. I am terrible at stitching, singing, and remembering the proper behavior for the dinner table. It was true. My sewing was abominable, and I almost always spilled something. But manners and propriety and that sort of nonsense, it simply bored me. I would have much rather have spent all my time with my tutor, a former schoolteacher. Geography and literature were far more interesting to me than were ladylike pastimes and fashion. Those things will come, Cécile. You have the natural grace your mother had. He gazed at me proudly. I smiled at him. I knew that telling me that I was like my mother was the most generous compliment he could give. Thank you, Father. Another surprise, Father, I said with incredulity. I've told you that this is fine. Cécile, this is the last one, he told me, laughing. Do you promise it? I asked. I promise, he said. All right, I said reluctantly. If you are certain that this is the last one. He smiled and continued eating. I hesitantly said after a moment, Are you not going to show it too? No, not at the moment, he said. You see, I do not have control over this surprise. It is different from the harp and that dress. Oh? I asked with puzzlement. Yes, he said pleasantly. After another bite of his dinner, he said, But it should be here soon enough. We have finished our meal and moved to the room in which we normally relaxed. In the evenings, I had been reading a novel and Father his, a newspaper, for about 10 minutes when there was a knock at the door. Yes, come in, called Father. I looked at him and he smiled, mischievously back at me. The door opened to reveal a young man I didn't recognize. Monsieur Desmarais, said Father. So that was that. Much better than before, though you all don't really know why yet. Also, while I'm in the long author's note mindset, I'd like to have a little pronunciation lesson, because it recently occurred to me that many of you probably have no idea to pronounce half of the names in my story. The entire world does not take French, it seems, so a few pointers. Don't say H when it starts the word. G-S are soft like the S in vision, usually written as J, and don't pronounce N-S at the very end of like a word. Here's a few people of significance, or who are in this chapter. Cécile, Maman Georges Pierpont, Georges Pierpont Helene, Gerard, Ale, just a short E, Zérard Étienne, Étienne Madame, Langlois, Madame Langlois Madame Tessier, Madame Tess, E.I. Robert, Robert Alexandre Desmarais, Alexandre Desmarais. You don't really know him yet, but you will. Chapter 15, The Visitor. Please, sir, call me Alexandra, said the man amiably. He was tall and muscular, with clear blue eyes and brown hair. He was very handsome, and I got the feeling he knew it. He reminded me irresistibly of someone I'd vowed I'd never think of again. I was suddenly overtaken by a wave of disgust, followed by an equally powerful pang of homesickness. My father smiled. It was clear he was already quite taken with this man. Very well, Alexandre. Well, how is your father, the Duke? We have not seen him since. Why, since the old days, when we used to hunt together in the wood near your home. It has been such a long time. Yes, far too long, agreed Alexandra. He was lying, I knew. But pray, sir, do introduce me to this lovely young woman. Of course, father said gaily. This is my daughter, Cécile. Cécile. This is the son of an old friend of mine, the Duc Desmarais. I am very pleased to make your acquaintance, sir, I said, trying to hide my disdain. The pleasure is entirely mine, mademoiselle, Alexandra said, taking my hand and kissing it gallantly to meet such a beautiful lady. Why, have we not met before? Oh, Cécile was much too young to travel with me in those days, father explained. I nodded, happy he had invented such a credible excuse. Although she does ride very well, father added hastily. She probably could have accompanied us, even then. Indeed, said Alexandre. Riding is probably my favorite thing in the mug world. There, it is nothing I love better, monsieur, I said. Then, I look forward to a ride with you, but you are all so formal around. Here, please call me Alexandra. Think of me as an old friend. I knew he wanted me to ask him to call me Cécile, and that was precisely why I wouldn't do it. Well, my old friend, I said, smiling as best as I could. Would you care for some tea? What do you think of Alexandra? Father whispered excitedly the next day. Very handsome, is he not? I looked over at Alexandra, who was reading on the opposite side of the back garden. He looked deep in thought and twirled a flower bud between his fingers as he read. Yes, father he is, I said with a smile. I knew what my father was up, and so gentlemanly and thoughtful, he added. Yes, you're right, I said again, more resignedly this time. When my father knew what he wanted, he stopped at nothing to get it. He was so avidly encouraging me to like Alexandra that I was getting quite annoyed. Papa never would have done something like this. I'm so glad he'll be staying with us for a few weeks, he continued, happily. You? No, Father, you're not a very subtle matchmaker, I said with a wry smile. Matchmaker, he said. Why, I haven't the faintest idea what you're talking about, Cécile. Whatever can you mean? Oh, Father, I laughed quietly. We both know that the son of a duke would make a marvelous husband for a count's daughter. It is no accident that you invited him to stay with us. I assure you I hadn't thought of that, my dear. Although you do make an excellent point, he said, as though the thought really had just occurred to him. I rolled my eyes and returned to my book. I had scarcely been here a week or two, and Father was already thrusting suitors at me. Alexandra was handsome, to be sure, but I found him repulsive. I doubted he was actually reading that book. The 2 days I had spent with him so far had led me to believe that beneath all his chivalrous behavior, he was shallow and self-centered. He was used to getting his own way, I could tell, especially with women. Don't you find him agreeable? Father pressed. I don't know, I said. Don't know? He whispered incredulously. The boy is perfect. Hush. Father, I urged him. He will hear you. Alexandre looked up at us with a smirk. I smiled innocently back. Cécile, this sun will spoil your complexion. Why don't you go in and practice your harp instead? Father whispered to me. Because, Father, I love the sun, I said. And the harp, well, I know it, was very expensive, but it bores me so. But, daughter, I am sure Alexandra would love to hear you play. He said, I do not want to. Father, I said more harshly than I meant to. I saw that I had hurt his feelings and apologized. I didn't mean that. I am not feeling well at the moment, I said untruthfully. If that is the case, then perhaps you had best go to your chambers until dinner. I excused myself eagerly and happily spent the next few hours in my room, reading my book in peace. A messenger arrived later that evening with a large, extravagant bouquet of flowers. For you, mademoiselle, Alexandra said gallantly to me. Merci beaucoup, I said. They're beautiful, monsieur. Beautiful. The flowers for a beautiful lady, he replied in an oily voice, kissing my hand. And I've told you to call me Alexandre. I had to pretend to be flattered. What a vile, despicable lowlife he was trying to get on my good side this way. I would never call him Alexandre. That would suggest intimacy. I passed the servants' quarters as I walked up to bed that night and couldn't help overhearing the maid's conversation. That bouquet he gave the young miss? Worst luck in one bouquet I've ever seen, said one. I had stopped in my tracks, listening. How so? I heard my maid Lucy say. How can flowers be lucky or unlucky? They've all got something different to say. Didn't you know, dearie? Nonsense, as they're just plants. It's not as though they can talk, Lucy said. Tisk, tisk. How little you know, young Lucy, put in another maid. All right. What did the flowers in that bouquet have to say to you? Brigitte? Oh, plenty, dearie, but nothing good. Tiger lilies, they mean he's after her money. Narcissus, that's an easy one. He's egotistical. And stupid. Orange mock, they mean deceit. And do you know the meaning of spider flowers? No. What? Said the others. Elope with me. The maids all shrieked with laughter. Why, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. Completely accidental-like. The man has picked the worst bunch of flowers. Good! If that's not fate, I don't know what is. I left the corridor laughing. Lucy, what do you think of Alexandra? I asked my maid that night as I was fixing my bed. He's very handsome, miss, she replied. No? Really? I need your opinion. La verite. She looked around as if trying to find a place to hide. The truth was a dangerous thing for a servant to tell. I knew that from personal experience. Lucy, I said, you know that you can trust me? I want us to be friends. She gave me an expression of doubt. I can't be friends with you, she seemed to be saying, although I knew she would never actually speak the words. She gave my pillow a few blows to fluff. I frowned. I couldn't have this. Come now, stop that. Yes, and stop. You don't have to do silly things I can do for myself. But the Count says, never mind what the Count says, Lucy. All I need of you is to heat water, and for my baths, and tie my stupid stay laces, because I haven't got to. Pairs of arms. I feel simply ridiculous making you do things like brush my hair and make my bed. It's nonsense. I am a perfectly capable human being. I'd much prefer your advice to your labor. I looked at her pointedly. If you don't tell my father, I won't either. What do you say? I smiled at her, and after a moment, she cautiously returned the smile. Come, here, sit, I beckoned. She sat in the chair facing mine. Now, what do you think of Alexandra? She bit her lip, then said, I'm not sure about him. I knew this was as close as Lucy would come to saying she detested him, at least for now. Excellent, I replied at once. I think he's horrid. I can't stand him at all. He's manipulative and deceitful and low. It may have been an exaggeration, but I didn't care. Oh, I think so too, she said excitedly. She lowered her voice. No. He's tried to, he's spoken inappropriately. Toward Alice? Has he? I gasped, grabbing her hands. Has he actually? Lucy, it shook her head vigorously. No, miss, he was just talking. Thank God she is all right, I said. I shuddered. Oh, I couldn't bear to have a man like that court me. I'd sooner kiss a frog than him. Tell the Count, miss, Lucy pleaded. Monsieur Desmarais obviously wants to marry you. You just can't sit there. I should, I said slowly, but he wouldn't listen. He likes him too much. A father wouldn't want a rake for a son-in-law? Lucy looked suddenly horrified with herself and clapped her hands over her mouth. It's all right, Lucy, I said, waving a hand. I completely agree. I did with you, but I'm afraid there's no way to get rid of him just yet. She frowned, then rose to leave, saying, Well, miss, you'd best be getting some rest now. Good night. Good, I replied. Then I added, so glad we had this talk, Lucy. I hope we can become friends. I do need a friend. Sometimes. Lucy smiled at me. Of course, miss. My friendship with Lucy grew with each passing day. Have you always worked here? I asked her one night. Ever since I was about 11 years old, miss, she answered. 11? I was 8 when I stopped suddenly. Lucy looked at me with an amused expression. I could tell her. After all, everyone here already knew that I hadn't grown up at the manor. They just didn't know where I had been. I used to be a maid, I said. A maid? Lucy said with surprise. I nodded. At the castle, for the prince. Did you ever meet him? She asked me. I nodded again. I think we were friends. You were friends with the prince? She asked, thoroughly impressed. My mind jumped to the weeks I had spent in that bedroom in the castle. The prince had visited me nearly every day. I missed his company. He had changed in those weeks. He had probably changed since I had last seen him too. Yes, I missed him very much. I've suddenly remembered where I was. Lucy, please don't tell anyone. I know that servants talk, but I do wish you wouldn't spread this. She looked at me solemnly. I won't. Then she murmured too, out herself. Imagine a maid being friends with the prince. Smiled again. It did sound rather far-fetched. Chapter 16. News. Well, there is to be some excitement around here. Father said at breakfast a few days later, reading a letter. I could not see its contents from where I sat across the table, but I could guess from the elaborate calligraphy that it was an invitation. I do love excitement, Alexandra said to me in a low voice, giving me a flirtatious glance that my father did not see. It was difficult to resist the urge to roll my eyes. What kind of excitement? I asked. A ball, Father replied. Actually, 2 balls. One is a masquerade, and the next is, oh, it seems to be a rose theme, because the roses are in bloom. My heart sunk into my stomach. I didn't want to go to one ball, much less 2. I would have to dance with Alexandra all evening, one after the next. Perhaps I could find a really good costume for the masquerade, so good he wouldn't be able to find me. Oh, what? Nonsense. He'd find me anyway, no matter how I tried to hide. It would be 2 long, boring nights of where? Alexandra asked, interrupting my nightmares. The castle, Father replied. I had nearly choked on my breakfast. Are you all right, Cécile? Father asked, sounding alarmed. I nodded, taking a long gulp of water. Yes, I am fine. Did you say the castle? Does this news upset you, daughter? Father asked with concern. He obviously knew it would be strange for me, be a guest where I had been, a servant. No, not at all, I said, feigning indifference. Pray, what is the occasion? The prince's 21st birthday. It's high time he assumed the throne, but he cannot do so unmarried, you know. I nodded again, this time more dazedly. Prince Étienne, the boy I served tea, was going to become king, but he had to find a queen first. For some reason, a bubble of hope began to fill my chest. I can scarcely wait until next week, Alexandra said, in his most gentlemanly of tones. Again, Father did not notice his shameless mental stare. Father, he smiled broadly at both of us. Nor can I. I felt the bubble deflating. I was already missing life at the cottage, but now I was even starting to miss being a maid. I knew I would be stuck with Alexandre, but it was my daughterly duty. We made plans to stay at an inn for the days of the balls. Our house was simply too far to be riding back and forth to the castle so many times. Thankfully, I convinced Father that Lucy should accompany us. At least I would have a friend on the daunting trip, even if she could not come to the balls with me. I was terrified of seeing the prince, but equally anxious about staying at the house with Alexandra. He had been here a week, and I was quite sick of him. Wherever I went, he was there. I could not read a book, and by myself in the library, for he was forever pestering me with pointless conversation. Somehow, he always managed to find me on my long walks through the gardens. My only refuge was my bedroom. I was sure, though, that had it not been for his desire to impress my father, he would probably have followed me there as well. Not that Father would have been any less in love with him if he did so. Your stitches are so tiny, Alexandra said quietly to me the day before we were to leave for the inn. It's a wonder you can even see. I surveyed my work. I knew he was only flattering me, but I could not help being a little proud. My needlepoint was not perfect, but it had gotten better. A pattern was finally discernible, and I had only had to take out a few stitches. I said nothing, pulling out my needle to continue working. Alexandre smiled at me. I need to find your father. There is something I must ask him. He stood up, knocking my elbow a little as he did. So, I gave a small gasp as the needle pricked my finger. A drop of blood fell on the white fabric. Monday. Due. I am so sorry. How clumsy of me, Alexandra said, noticing what he had done. He reached for my hand. Oh, no, it's all right, I said, pulling it out of his grasp. He gave me an odd look, as though he were assessing me in some way. I felt my face heat up slightly. He smirked and said, I'll be back in a moment, then turned and left the room. I am counting down the seconds, I thought sarcastically, putting my finger in my mouth to stop the bleeding. In no time, he was back with a different, even more self-contented smile on his face. Father followed him in and said, Cécile, Alexandra has something he wishes to ask you. My eyes widened. I was sure he was going to declare his intentions to me. I had to get out. Or was there some way to stall him? What did I do? I couldn't suddenly be ill again. Father wouldn't believe that. And I couldn't fall and be injured. I was sitting down. Tripping Alexandra was out of the question. He might get a bruise, but nothing that would retire him to his room for several hours. I was struck by a sudden inspiration. I picked up the cup of tea next to me, repressing an impish smile. Then I accidentally spilled it all over the front of my dress. I dropped the teacup and fussed over my gown. Oh mon Dieu, how clumsy of me, I said, looking up at Alexandra as I used his words. Please, excuse me. I saw Father's face turn a dangerous shade of crimson, but Alexandre merely smiled knowingly at me. For propriety's sake, I had to leave. I took dainty steps away from the room, not in any hurry. I had just inexcusably insulted both Alexandra and my father. I knew I should. I'd be ashamed. Maman would have scolded me, and Papa would have given me a reproachful look, stern enough to reduce me to tears. But I couldn't help feeling triumphant and elated at my freedom, even if it was only temporary. Neither Alexandra nor Father brought up my escape at dinner, nor my blatant evasion of both of them in the hours since. But after the meal, Father took me aside and reprimanded me for the foolish thing I had done. "Cécile, I am very disappointed in you," he said, looking furious. "You have offended Alexandre and embarrassed me, and I should say you are. It's very lucky that he has not left the place altogether. In the future, you will listen respectfully to anything a man has to say, not run off like a child, especially one who is so obviously enamored of as you. You should be ashamed and part of yourself, Cécile. He must think you an absolute barbarian. You should have heard me trying to persuade him to forgive you. I suppose this is what comes of being raised a servant." He spoke at the last words with the utmost derision. Shocked, I said I was sorry and promised never to do something so irresponsible again. "I should hope so. Now, you will join us in the drawing room and apologize to Alexandra, and then you will hear him out." It was an order, not a request. As I had expected, Alexandre requested to court me. A father's face. He told me I had to accept, and I did so as naturally as I could. But almost more unnerving than the prospect of being made to wed, Alexandra was this sudden change in my father. I had never seen him. I'm so angry before, and it frightened me. The father who had just scolded me was so different from the same kind. Vulnerable looking, the man who had told me about his wife back at the cottage in the woods. What could have altered him so? Why did not I have a say in my own marriage? We had plenty of money, and we did not want for land or title. Alexandra's family could give us nothing we did not already possess. What was the good, then, in forcing me into a match I was so obviously opposed to? Late that night, I stirred from my bed at the sound of a horse riding up into the house. Somehow, in my drowsy delirium, I imagined it to be Diavolo and traipsed over to the windowsill. One light breeze from the window, though, and the chilly night air quickly disillusioned me. Instead of my Black Stallion gleaming in the moonlight, I saw a cloaked man dismounting a large gray horse. It had to be in the early hours of the morning. What was this man doing? And here? He wasn't wearing a messenger's uniform, and he couldn't have been here by accident. Could he? I put on my dressing gown and stuck my head out into the hall, tiptoeing down the servants' stairs when I was sure it was safe to do so. I couldn't see anyone in the kitchens, the dining room, the drawing room, or the library. Where had the man gone? Everyone was asleep. Alexandra was. That much was certain. I had passed his room and he snored quite loudly. Was the stranger a thief? Suddenly, I heard voices. They were muffled, but I was sure they were voices. Only one man had come to the house. Who was he talking to? Then I noticed that there was a light in Father's study. I crept closer to the door, trying to silence even my own breathing and hear what was going on. The door was open a crack, but I could not a chance they're seeing me by looking in. Simply can't risk it, I heard my father say. If we don't do it now, there will never be. An opportunity, said a voice I didn't recognize. It must have belonged to the cloaked man. Emile, father said in a lower voice, if everything were going according to plan, I would agree with you. But that is not the case. What is not going according to plan, Andre? The man called Emile and demanded. Is something not going according to plan? Is it the girl? What girl? Evidently, father's face betrayed something, because Emile said, what? He is stopping us from taking action now. Father said nothing for a moment. I heard shuffling feet within and stepped away from the door, my heart pounding. What if they were to come out and find me eavesdropping? Then father said, very well. I am glad we have an accord, Emile said, sounding pleased and with himself. I heard him stand up to leave, and I ran silently back up the stairs, only stopping when I was back in my chambers with the door shut tightly. Chapter 17, Masquerade. I looked at myself once more in the mirror, letting out a shaky breath. My gown was more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen, let alone worn. The plum-colored silk taffeta skirt opened out in a graceful bell shape. The fitted bodice was patterned with tiny fleurs-de-lis and outlined by a thin gold cord. The sleeves stopped at my elbows in the same sheer white material that lined the square neckline. And don't forget this, my lady, Lucy said, holding out a mask of the same violet hue as my dress. Thank you, Lucy. My hands shook as I attempted to tie the mask spark and ribbons around my curls. I soon gave up and said, oh, I'm so nervous. I tried to tell myself to stop being so spineless, but I just wanted to curl up in bed and stay there all night. Lucy and smiled, tying the strings herself. The night before, I had told her of my past dealings with the prince. You're beautiful, miss. There's nothing to be nervous about. Cécile, we are leaving now, father called from the next room. A small corridor that connected father's and Alexandre's bedroom with my own. I looked wide-eyed at Lucy, and she squeezed my hands reassuringly. All will be well, my lady. The carriage rolled up to the castle not long after. It was a sight to see, all lit up and ornamented for the evening. Lanterns hung everywhere, and the trees that lined the pathway looked as though they were covered gold and silver leaves. I wished I could pluck a branch off of each, so that when I was old and tired, I could still believe I had been to such a magnificent party. The great hall, too, looked lovely, festooned with flowers and candles and garlands. It was odd, though. I remembered walking these halls, but a few months ago, a bucket of soapy water or a broom in hand. It seemed so long ago, almost as though it had been a dream, or as though this moment were a dream, a lovely dream. You act as though you've never been to a ball, Alexandra said, jokingly to me, noticing my gaping mouth and wide eyes. I never had, but he couldn't know that. It's just that it's been such a long time, I said quickly. And this one is so very lovely, don't you agree? He looked at me with a smile and said, oh, certainly. A merry gavotte was playing, and there were already many couples and dancing. I stood on my toes as discreetly as I could, looking around at the room. Queen Catherine was sitting on her throne, but I saw no any sign of her son. Perhaps as the guest of honor he had not yet have arrived. And then, quite suddenly, I saw him, the prince, standing only across the room. I felt faint. I took another look at him when I was quite ready. Could 2 months' absence change a person so much? He looked taller than I remembered. Or maybe it was because he wasn't being weighed down by his worry and grief, and his skin hadn't darkened, but it lacked the sallow, a tinge of sleep deprivation and poor health. Or was it merely the lighting? He was wearing a very regal navy jacket with gold embroidery. His dark hair was shining, and his eyes, they were as unreadable as ever. He and his mother were the only ones in the room, not wearing masks, but I could have picked him out of the crowd. Anyway, just looking at him made me feel uneasy. He must have hated me. I knew. Dang it. And if he had known who I was, he would have detested me even more. The intensity of my gaze must have drawn his attention. He made eye contact with me for a moment, an expression of puzzlement crossing in his features. I quickly looked away. Cécile, would you care to dance? Alexandra asked. I shushed him. Don't say my name. No one must overhear that I was called Cécile. Come. Now, Mademoiselle Levesque, don't we know each other well enough by now? We may soon be mar. I cut him off, not wanting to hear the dreaded word. No, it's not that. It's just, oh, come on, let's dance, I said, unenthusiastically. Eager to get away from the prince, I pulled Alexandra by the hand toward the floor. Very well, he said, sounding slightly surprised but pleased. Nonetheless, I was disgusted by him, but terrified of the prince finding out who I was. I looked around the room, but always kept an eye on Prince Étienne. He wasn't dancing. I knew he probably didn't much care for the naughty young ladies here tonight. They were all superficial and silly, gossiping in pairs or trios, and flirting coyly with handsome young and nobles. Poor Prince Étienne. His mother was making him marry one of them. I knew exactly how unhappy he would be. I was being forced to wed someone I didn't care for as well. As if on cue, Alexandra spoke. Why is it you are so intent on ignoring me? He asked me. Pardon. Me? I said, blushing. I hadn't been paying attention at all. Instead, standing on tiptoe to look over his shoulder at the prince. We were a safe distance now. He laughed. What is it about you? Is there something about me? I asked, bristling. Yes, he responded. I couldn't see his expression from his mask. You. I know. I consider myself a rather eligible young man. And yet you. I couldn't care less that I'm courting you. I pretended to be very interested in the gown of a young lady passing, and by. He was so incredibly egotistical. Or perhaps you do care, he said quietly in my ear, and you're just too strong and independent to admit it. He was revolting. I didn't answer. Alexandre, I took my silence as assent. See, I know you so well, he smirked. I nearly cried, trying to hold in my laughter. Mademoiselle, I heard a voice say behind me. I turned around slowly, knowing the voice and dreading what I now had to do. May I have this dance? The prince asked, offering me his hand. Of course, Your Highness, I stuttered, accepting it. How could I have been so stupid as to not change my voice at all? He he would surely recognize it. We made our way to the dance floor, where a slow waltz was beginning. I prayed I wouldn't step on his toes. I avoided his dark, penetrating eyes, thankful to have a mask on. I couldn't help wondering whether he could tell who I was, despite my expensive gown, curled hair, and hidden features. I hoped he couldn't. I don't believe I know you, miss, the prince said after a moment. What is your name? His name. What was my name? Certainly not Cécile Pierpont. I couldn't even be Cécile Levesque, for my given name would certainly remind him of the maid who had left his service without so much as an adieu. I am the daughter of Lee, Comte de Levesque. I stalled nervously. Count Levesque? I was unaware he had a daughter, the prince said, raising an eyebrow. I knew his expression well. He didn't believe, and me. Ironic, considering the fact that it was probably the only truth I would tell him tonight. I have been away at school for some years now, Your Highness. He said. I knew that my comment made my claim of nobility even less credible, but I hoped desperately that he would believe it. Really? Where? He asked, sounding interested. I was positively trembling now. The country, I stammered. Vaguely, I should like to have a talk with your father. I have not spoken with him in some time, the prince said, looking me hard in the eyes as though he were trying to force a confession from me. He would be delighted, Your Highness, I replied, trying to sound resolute. You see him there, by the wall. I shall take you to him after the dance, if you wish it. He softened his gaze, evidently aware that he was troubling me. I am sorry, miss. I must not have heard your name. Mariette, I offered. My mother's name had been the first one to come into my mind. Mariette, he repeated, and our eyes met. I looked away again, thankful for once that I had unremarkable mud-brown eyes. He would have remembered a vibrant shade like blue of Sophie's eyes, a bright azure I had always envied. Are you enjoying the ball, Mademoiselle Mariette? Oh, yes, Your Highness, I said, attempting a sincere tone. Father, and I have not been to a ball in some time. Nor have I, murmured the prince. He seemed to be weighing something mentally before he said, Do you like to read? Very. How much? I said, before I could stop myself. I froze. Cécile liked to read. Mariette couldn't. Not very much. I mean, not much at all, in fact. I prefer. What did I prefer? Think. A bouquet of roses caught my eye. Gardening. And looked away, wanting to slap myself. Gardening? I couldn't have thought of something better. And besides, now he must have known I liked to. I read. For why else would I have told such an obvious falsehood? Why? It was a wonder he hadn't guessed who I was already. Or perhaps he had. Perhaps he was simply biding his time before he revealed me to, and the whole hall as an imposter, a traitor, and a coward. Really? He asked, looking amused. Gardening? He seemed on the verge of laughter. Yes, gardening, I said firmly. I am quite passionate about flowers. Wisteria, jonquils, lilies of the valley. I prattled, and I quite especially love jasmine. It was certainly entertaining him, but not convincing him. I breathed a sigh of relief when the dance finally ended. Thank you, mademoiselle, for the dance," he said, with a bow and a smile. "Thank you, Your Highness," I said, curtsying, "and happy birthday." He walked away, and I turned to look for Alexandra. I needed the mindless chatter he supplied me with to take my mind off of the impending calamity. It was awkward, but tomorrow will be worse, I said with a sigh, as Lucy helped me untie my stays. I will have no mask to hide under. Did you talk to him? Yes, I danced with him once, and he kept looking at me all evening. I didn't believe I was actually the daughter of Count Levesque. Lucy muttered something, smirking, but I didn't ask her what. Before I went to bed that night, I went to wish Father and Alexandra good, and tonight, their door was open to reveal an empty chamber, deciding they must have lingered in the dining hall. I went down the stairs to find them. They were deep in conversation, with their backs to me. When I spotted them, I wouldn't disturb them. I turned back up the stairs to go, but my curiosity got the better of me. I simply couldn't help listening. "So, it will have to be tomorrow then," Alexandra said under his breath. "Yes," Father replied wearily. "It must." My heartbeat quickened. Did this have something to do with Father's mysterious nighttime conference? And everything is ready? All we must do is watch and wait. The moment he goes anywhere alone, we must be ready to give the word. Who was he? I hurried back up the stairs where I could be alone, but I was too loud. "Cécile?" Father called, sounding cross again. It was caught. Thinking quickly, I pretended as though I had been coming down the stairs, not going up them. The staircase was hidden from view by a wall, and they would never know. "Yes, Father?" I said innocently, stepping into his line of sight. He looked me over with an air of displeasure. "Daughter, do you often listen in on other people's conversations? Conversations that don't concern you in the slightest?" "No, Father," I said, trying to look confused and surprised. "I was just coming down to bid you good night." "Were you indeed?" he replied, though he didn't say it as though it were a question. "Yes." I was shocked. Was this new father the real father? "Well, go on then. Off to bed with you." "Bon. Nuit, Father," I said, kissing him on the cheek, trying to play the perfect daughter. "Bonne nuit, Alexandre." "Good night, Cécile," Alexandra said, looking entirely too aware of what I was up to. Chapter 18. The Revelation. "For God's sake, Cécile, why are you so jittery?" Alexandra said impatiently. I didn't say anything. What excuse could I offer? "Let me get you something to drink," he said, rising. I thanked him and he left. "You look lovely, Cécile," Father said, hugging me. I smiled at him and returned the embrace. He was in a much better mood today, and I was relieved. "I'm very sorry I was so rude to you last night," he continued. I had a splitting headache that was putting me in such a bad humor. "Well, I'm glad you are feeling better," I said brightly. "Thank you," he replied with a smile. A richly dressed man addressed him a moment later, and he led him away, exclaiming, "Baron Dupuis, I've been wanting to ask you something for quite some time now." Alexandre returned with our drinks soon after. "To us," he said, raising his wine glass. I forced a smile, and while he was draining his glass, dumped my own into the potted plant next to me. I didn't notice Prince Étienne enter the great hall. He appeared quite suddenly, as if by magic. He stood across the room from me, looking reluctant, even irritated. I turned away to postpone his inevitable discovery as long as possible. It would not be long, though. Without my mask, I felt vulnerable and frightened. I looked cautiously in his direction. He was greeting a group of young ladies. The maidens were all the same, giggling demurely and flattering him endlessly. I could tell from here that he was bored by their dazzling smiles. They prodded him for conversation, but he didn't respond. Finally, they gave up, floating away, and he joined his mother at the far side of the room. She straightened her son's crown, speaking with a warm smile. I wished I knew what they were talking about. He left her after a moment, looking resigned. Then he asked a quiet, brown-haired girl to dance. She wasn't terribly pretty, and her dress was of an unflattering hue. "Cécile, would you care to dance?" Alexandra asked me, noticing that I was looking at the spinning couples. "Oh, mon Dieu, no," I answered. He looked surprised at my discourteous response. "I mean, not just now, thank you," I said quickly. He laughed at me. "You're going to be a handful, aren't you?" "I'll do my best," I thought, smiling angelically at him. I watched them dance. She was so timid, hardly saying a word, and she kept blushing. Once they came quite near to where Alexandra and I stood, I quickly turned my face toward the wall behind me. Alexandra noticed, of course. "Do you not care for the prince?" he asked with his characteristic smirk. "What?" I said, caught off guard. Of course not. I mean, I do. Well, I don't know. I hardly know him. I don't like him," Alexandra said more quietly. I tried not to show my surprise and distaste. "Why not?" I asked casually. "Étienne just doesn't know how to run this kingdom. If I were giving the orders, I'd be doing things differently." What a rude thing to say, I thought. What had Prince Étienne done to merit such unwanted disrespect? I looked to where he was dancing with the shy brunette, but to my horror, he was gazing straight back at me. His expression changed. My cheeks felt as though they were on fire. Then, jaw jutting out as though he were posing for a royal portrait, he bowed to his bewildered partner and left the room. He must hate me, I thought, close to tears. He must hate me. But I rushed after him, ignoring Alexandra's confusion. He was stalking down the corridor, out to the rose gardens. I knew my surroundings well. It wasn't hard to recall myself walking here, carrying a bucket and cloth to wash the windows, or a broom to sweep the cold stone floors. He had a long stride, and I could barely keep up with him. "Damn this dress," I thought, as I tripped over my dusty rose gown. "Your Highness," I said breathlessly when I had almost caught up with him. He kept walking down the hallway, not answering. "You must listen," I pleaded, rushing along behind him. He turned around, straight-faced but cool. "You have nothing to say to me, mademoiselle, or at least nothing worth saying." I was hurt, but I knew I deserved it. I could read his thoughts. Of all the low, dirty schemes, Mariette, indeed. How dare she? And his anger was perfectly justified. "Your Highness, I'm so sorry," I began. I had no idea who I was, or what I was, or, well, Father just... "It really is none of my business," he said simply. He was so calm and collected. He had changed. The Étienne the First knew would have been yelling for me to get out of his sight by now. The transformation was unsettling. But if you'll excuse me, I have guests to attend to." He interrupted me. "But I must tell you, you must listen." I grabbed his arm desperately. For a split second, his heart seemed to soften. Then, as though he were suddenly realizing who I was, he removed my hand from his sleeve and simply walked away. "I think you should find your escort." He will be quite desolate to have lost you. My escort? Alexandre? So, that's what this is about. I burst out, offended by his words, but more affected by the fact that he was completely unperturbed. Are you jealous that Mademoiselle Pierpont, or Mademoiselle Levesque, or whatever your name is tonight? This is not about jealousy. This is about trust and honesty, virtues you clearly know little about. But I didn't know, I said, holding back tears as he continued down the corridor. I didn't know. He turned around suddenly, dark eyes flashing dangerously. Mademoiselle, you may wear fine clothing and have wealthy, titled beaux, but no one is taken in by your performance. You aren't noble, no matter how large your estate is, no matter how advantageous a match you make, no matter how great a fortune you inherit. You cannot buy respect, grace, admiration, dignity. They have no weight in gold. You will never be able to escape the fact that you're no more than a common servant. He was silent, letting the power of his words sink in. We stared at each other for a few seconds. His eyes were hard, emotionless, his expression blank, as though nothing had happened. This, I knew, was the worst insult that the prince could give. My eyes filled with tears. I looked up to keep them from flowing. Then I turned around and left. Why was I wasting my time? Cécile, Alexandra asked a moment later. What the devil is going on? Are you all right? What were you thinking? Running out of here like a madwoman? I said nothing. I didn't want to talk to him. I sat down without a word, still thinking about the prince. How dare he speak to me that way? What gave him the right to say such horrible things to anyone? He called himself noble, of course. He had the bluest blood that ever was seen. Never mind the fact that he had irreparably insulted a lady. And how could he accuse me of only being concerned with money? If he stopped thinking of himself for one moment, perhaps he would see that I had made a difficult decision. He had grown up in perfect comfort. Just because I had worked for most of my life, did that make me an inferior human being? It was not so easy for me as it was for him. The simple act of ringing a bell would not have brought me a lavish meal a year ago. I had earned everything I had. At that moment, I felt a rush of pride. For Papa and Maman, for Elaine, even for Alexandra. He was right in disliking the prince and his stupid policies. Étienne was a monster, and I had never hated him so much. What has gotten into you? He said more quietly, searching my face. I knew I was acting like a pouting child, but I remained silent. His expression changed. He gave a nod, smirking. I thought it a curious gesture before I realized he wasn't looking at me, but behind me, at someone across the room. I couldn't tell who, but it was no doubt a maiden. I raised my eyebrows at him. We were practically engaged now. Didn't he have some self-control? What does that look for, Cécile? He asked teasingly. I didn't reply. Any respect I had felt for him a moment ago vanished. He slid closer to me and snaked his arm around my waist. Come now, what is it? When he saw that I wouldn't be swayed, he brought his lips near my ear and said, Soon all our troubles will be over. So stop frowning, ma chérie. I could have been sick. Ma chérie? But before I had time to wonder what he had meant about our troubles being over soon, a horrible sound burst through the joyful music, a roar of agony, a yell of utmost pain. I shot to my feet. Where was my father? Chapter 19. Roses. The whole room was in turmoil. The guests were squawking like chickens, running out as fast as they could, women shrieking, everyone making for the doors. But I had to find father. It was he who had yelled out so. I was certain of it. Find father, find father. It was my only thought. I headed away from the door, trying trying to push my way through the throng, against the crowd. My toes were crushed. Once, twice, too many times to count, but I really couldn't feel it. My father was in danger, in pain. Finally, breaking away from the masses of people in the great hall, I raced through the corridors I knew so well. Where could he be? I checked room after room, calling his name. Why wasn't he answering? Couldn't he hear me? Every room, no response. No sign of him anywhere. Soon, all that remained were the rose gardens. The gardens were empty, as far as I could see. It was dark. I grabbed one of the lanterns from the wall and raced among the maze of beautiful, perfect, sweet-smelling flowers. He was nowhere to be found. I headed back to the door, heart still pounding. I was opening the door to go back inside when I heard a weak voice say, "Cécile." It was only a faint murmur. "Father?" I cried, holding out my lantern. "Father, where are you?" But it wasn't Father. The voice was coming from only a few feet away from me, where Prince Étienne was lying in the shadows, curled up in pain. "Étienne," I whispered, dropping to my knees. "Stabbed me," Étienne gasped. I swooned suddenly. The light fell onto his shirt, stained with blood that was spurting from a gash in his chest. The wound was near his shoulder, as though he had turned away just in time to keep the attacker's knife from finding his heart. The garden was spinning, but instinct told me to put my handkerchief in the wound. He winced. "Cécile," he whispered. I... "Stop talking," I said, hardly recognizing my own quavering tones. "I know it hurts. I'm sorry." I bit my bottom lip. The blood was soaking through the thin piece of cloth. I twisted it around to make it thicker, but still saw the red stains growing. My handkerchief soon resembled a somewhat surreal, but sickening, rose. "Help," I said, my voice cracking. No one could hear me. "Someone help," I called again, louder this time. Why wasn't anyone coming? I looked down again, in a daze. My fingers were bloody. So was my gown. Étienne was closing his eyes, his face deathly pale. A mutilated rose, its stem shredded and petals torn, fell from his hand. "Étienne, no!" I screamed. "Say something! Wake up!" His eyes flickered open, then shut again. I mustn't move my handkerchief. My face felt wet. Tears had been streaming down my cheeks, probably for some time. The flame in my lantern burnt out. I was shivering, despite the warmth of the night. My stomach hurt. "Wake up!" I sobbed quietly, still not daring to move. "Étienne, please, wake up." A lifetime later, men came, with more lanterns. "Mademoiselle, you must go," someone said, trying to pull me away. "Someone call a doctor, quick." "No, I can't move my handkerchief," I replied. "Help me move her." "No, stop it. She's a girl, not an animal. You're upsetting her." "Wait, look, she's plugged the wound. Monday due, so she has." How did she know to do it? I don't know, but thank God she did. The guests must leave at once. "Yes, tell them to leave." "Étienne," I sobbed. "Where is he? Where is the prince? Oh, thank God, a doctor." "My dear, you can remove your hand," a voice said gently. I shook my head. "See there, I've got a bandage. It's all right." "No, I can't leave. Get her away from here." "No, stop it. Let me go." "Come on, miss." "She won't budge." "Of course not. She's hysterical. Get someone she knows." "But who is she?" "Cécile, Cécile, it's Alexandra. You must come with me." "Stop it. Get away. Let me go. I can't leave him." I grabbed at Étienne. I was being dragged away from him, back into the hall. Father was waiting there, the only one left, with my cloak. He draped it over me, and Alexandra pulled me away again at once. Before I was quite aware of what was going on, we were in the carriage. "I can't move my handkerchief," I sobbed quietly into Alexandra's chest. "She's in shock," Alexandra said quietly, covering me with his coat. "We must leave at once," Father said, putting his own coat over me as well. "Get Bernard to take these things in." I heard Father say what seemed like a moment later. "Yes, my lord," Lucy replied. "Lucy and Bernard, that was Father's manservant. What were they doing here?" I was still in the carriage. We had just left the castle, hadn't we? The castle. Oh God, why wasn't I with Étienne? Where was he? Was he all right? I sat up quickly. I felt suddenly as though someone had knocked me over the head and lay back down. "Keep still, Cécile," Alexandra said gently from above me. He lifted me tenderly, as though I were only a baby, and stepped out of the carriage. Gravel crunched beneath his feet. I looked up at him. His handsome face looked determined, but kind. I looked around dazedly. We were at the manor again. "Your father insisted we come right home," he explained softly upon seeing my confusion. "He was worried about you." A pause. I was too. He looked almost embarrassed. The expression was one I'd never seen from him. I didn't know whether to thank him or to ask the motive behind his kindness. He put me down outside the door to my bedchamber and steadied me as I tried to stay upright. "Do you need anything? Water, perhaps? Something to eat? What can I get for you?" I thanked him but declined. "All I need is to sleep." He smiled at me. "I wish I had half your strength, Mademoiselle Cécile." Then he took my hand and kissed it gently, not with his usual exaggerated gallantry. "Good night." In my room, I turned over the night's events in my head. Had it really happened? I hadn't realized that I had been clutching something in my right hand. A red rose petal, ripped down the middle. I gazed at it for some time. What if our argument that evening was the last time we ever spoke? Chapter 20, News Again. We heard conflicting rumors from the castle, each different but terrifying in its own way. Some said Étienne had nearly been killed, that the black cloud of death was hanging over the castle, and he was hanging on to life by a mere string. Others said he was making a slow recovery, but could easily relapse at any moment. Some claimed it had all been a plot to root out disloyalty in the kingdom, that the entire affair had been a charade. I didn't know what to believe. I wanted someone, anyone, to say that he was doing well and getting better every day. But no such news came. No one knew who had done it. The traitor could be in his midst at any moment, just waiting for the opportunity to finish what he or she, as far as anyone knew it could have been a woman, had begun. I worried constantly that I would never see him again, replaying our last meeting in my head over and over. Was I just a common servant? Is that all he thought of me as? He had called my name when I had found him, had recognized me in the faint light, but no conclusion could be drawn from that his life had been at stake. He didn't care who helped him, as long as someone did. I had tried. I prayed to God that someone was trying now. A thought nagged at me, though. Had I done my best? Could I have done more for Étienne? If only I had found him sooner, I thought desperately. If I had run a little faster, if I had gotten to the gardens quicker, he wouldn't have lost so much blood. He would have recovered without a doubt. And why had I not called louder for someone to come? Why had I tried to stop his bleeding with but a scrap of silk? I should have ripped off a length of fabric from my dress. I should have known how to do more. Now, who could tell if my meager efforts had been enough? I had been completely stunned for several seconds. Those seconds could have cost Étienne his life. I knew I should take all my fears and lock them away, that I should say firmly to myself, "Cécile, he will be all right. All will be well." But I couldn't. Everything led my mind back to the prince. There was no way to fill the days, hours, minutes. I skimmed through many volumes of our extensive library, but never really read. A book could be ruined by the simple thought that a passage I found funny would appeal to Étienne as well. I went for a ride at least once every day, but was never truly satisfied by it. No horse in my father's stables could quite compare to Diavolo his horse. I ate little and slept even less. I found myself staring into space most of the time, brow furrowed and lips pressed together. I was constantly nervous, startled by a creak in the floorboards or a knock on the door. I thought often of going to see him, and why couldn't I? Elizabeth or Hélène would let me in. I was sure of that. And the doctors knew me from when I had been sick myself. Getting in would be no difficulty. But what if he didn't want to see me? I could upset him, slow the healing process even more. I could think of no reason that he would wish for me to be there after the argument we had had. And anyway, what did I expect to gain by seeing him? He would be covered in bandages, pale as a ghost, asleep or unconscious. He couldn't talk to me. Or, if by some miracle he could, would he just repeat the sentiments he had expressed that night? No, it was undoubtedly best that I stay home. Alexandra was actually a comfort to me in this time. He had the ability to distract me for a while, to make me think of something other than Étienne for a few short moments. But it was different from before, when my contempt for him had pushed all other thoughts out of my head. No, now he was behaving, well, like a friend. He had given his showy, overly chivalrous behavior a rest ever since that night. His new manners were warmer, more like a real person. I was getting to know him, and even although ever so slowly growing to respect him. However, as if life weren't difficult enough, I soon received what was probably the worst news I could. It was a hot afternoon, not the first of its kind that summer, nor the last. I was wandering through the corridors when Father stopped me, a letter in one hand. "Cécile, I'm afraid I have some bad news." I looked up at him with concern, unsure of what to expect. "I've had a letter from Virginie Pierpont. Her husband is feeling unwell." Whatever I had been expecting, that wasn't it. Perhaps money was short, because there had been no rain for quite some time. Perhaps Alexandra had to leave. At the very worst, I had thought that some aristocrat friend of Father's had died, and we would have to attend his funeral. But Papa was sick. Étienne was gravely injured. Could things get any worse? "Unwell?" I repeated dazedly. Father said softly, "Cécile, he is very sick. I must go to him at once." I stammered. "Of course," Father said. "Would you like me to come?" "No, it's all right," I replied, shakily. He nodded once, a trusting gesture. I rushed up to my chambers and began frantically stuffing a bag full of my simplest dresses. I couldn't leave the cottage until Papa was better, and who knew how long that would be. Alexandra caught me on my way out. "Cécile, where are you going? Is something wrong?" he asked, looking sincerely worried. "A very old friend is sick," I said. "Then I shan't stand in your way," he said. "Do you need a companion?" "No, thank you," I said. "Of course," he said, bowing and opening the door for me. "Cécile, my darling," Maman said, embracing me as I came through the door. Face red and throat parched, the cottage was not cold, but it was nonetheless an oasis from the sweltering heat outside. "How is Papa?" I asked, searching her face for any signs. "He is very sick, my dear," she said, looking terrified. "He caught a chill not long after you left us last, and it has only gotten worse. May I see him? Of course, Maman replied. He would love to see you. The papa I saw was not the same man he had been 2 months ago. He was in bed, covered in blankets, with a half-empty bowl of soup on the table. His skin was ashen and looked almost crusty. He was not asleep, that is to say, his bloodshot eyes were partly open. But I wasn't sure if he was awake either. Papa, I said softly, sitting in the chair at his side. He didn't move. I took his hand. Papa, I repeated. It's Cécile. I was taken aback to see his eyes move toward me. He smiled when he realized who I was. Hello, Cécile, he said weakly. How are you feeling? I said, chewing on my bottom lip. He smiled again. Not very one. He interrupted himself with a fit of coughing that sounded so painful it made me wince. I'm sorry. I won't make you talk again, I said. Nonsense, he said, turning his head toward me. I shushed him, though I knew he wouldn't be persuaded. Why? My heart broke as I watched him lean over, hacking violently. He caught his breath a moment later and rasped, I'm rather bored, Cécile. Would you read to me? He gestured to a book that was serving as a cushion for the soup bowl. Some time later, the cottage door opened. I heard Maman speaking in low tones with someone, but I continued reading. The doorway creaked behind me. I stopped reading and turned in my seat. Hello, Georgia, Alain said, stepping forward. My jaw nearly dropped. What was he doing here? How are you feeling? Papa smiled wanly. I've been better, my boy. Alain held up the parcel he was holding. I've brought you something, but you must promise me to eat it. I'll eat anything as long as it's as good as the plums you brought yesterday, Papa said with a boyish smile. I was glad to see the expression on his face, although not quite sure I approved of the one who had inspired it. And those tomatoes. Wherever did you get such perfect tomatoes in this drought? Maman put in. I felt a slight warmth in my cheeks and looked away. So, Alain had been bringing them food, had been providing for them as a son would. I felt betrayed. Why had Alain known of my father's sickness before I had? And then I felt ashamed. I should have made more of an effort to look after Maman and Papa. I should have been the one bringing them fresh plums and tomatoes. I certainly had the means. Alain turned to me as though he had just noticed I was there. Hello, Cécile. Have you been here long? No, perhaps half an hour, I replied coolly, unsure how to treat him. He seemed to have forgotten what had happened between us, but I could not. What is it then, boy? Papa wheezed, nodding at the package. Alain gave him a mischievous smile. Theatrically, he untied the twine to reveal a chicken, already beheaded and plucked. Maman cooed and tutted. Your hard-earned wages, on poor old fools like us. Oh, Alan, you do spoil us so. I'm going to make chicken stew, and you're staying for supper. She flapped off to the kitchen, fussing over the fat bird. That woman goes mad every time you come, Papa said softly. Alain laughed. That's all right. If anyone deserves that chicken, she does, he responded. I tried not to stare. Why was he bending over backward to be generous and charitable? Certainly they had been friends, but he had never been this close to Maman and Papa before. Besides, wasn't visiting them taking away from the precious time he could be spending robbing wealthy nobles like father? Our eyes met. Let's let him rest a bit, Alain said quietly, gesturing at Papa, whose eyes were fluttering open and shut. I followed Alain out. So, you're here fairly often, I take it? I said stiffly. Are you jealous? He grinned at me. The impertinence. I opened my mouth to give an answer, but was interrupted. Why have you not brought Florence? Maman called from the kitchen. Florence? Who was Florence? Was Alain courting someone? She should be here soon, Elaine replied. Who is Florence, and how does she stand you? I asked curtly. Now I know you're jealous, he said. My eyes narrowed, and he laughed. Cécile, I was joking, honestly. I haven't forgiven you, I told him pointedly. Clearly, he retorted. The he sighed and hung his head. I'm sorry. I was stupid. He looked sincere. Alain used to be a very honest person. Was he still? Alain gazed at me intently with those clear blue eyes. Cécile, je le jure, I will do anything to ensure your happiness. Surely you must know that. He didn't deserve my forgiveness. What he had done was unpardonable, wasn't it? But all the same, I couldn't stop myself from breaking down and saying, I know, Elaine. You know, but you don't believe, he said, staring hard at me. I looked away. His gaze was far too intense. No, Cécile, look at me. I will always be there for you. Always. I smiled. Of course you will. We're best friends. He grinned, grabbing me in a tender hug. That's my Cécile. I pulled away, still curious. Now, who is this Florence? You'll meet her, fear not, he replied, a smile playing on his lips.